Hi, Elaine here. It happens so often, I'm not sure where or when it started, but I saw another article just the other day with its accusatory title. I don't even remember what it was ultimately about, but I do know who they considered the perpetrator. Millennials Killed, quote unquote, have become the first two words of a countless number of articles, blaming our generation for a death of fads, traditions, and even industries. Today, Carlin and I talk about the attention grabbing trend and whether or not this naming convention is something too that millennials should kill. Again, I'm Elaine.
And I'm Carlin.
Welcome back to our podcast, Related. So, Carlin,
So, Elaine.
we're talking about this naming convention.
Yes.
Are there any notable articles with this title that you've read recently?
So, fun fact, I had kind of forgotten about this trend. If I'm being super honest, I remember it was really rampant in like the 2015 to 2020. And I don't know, did the pandemic kill the Millennials Killed trend? I don't know. But I feel like honestly, more recently, I read more articles that cite Gen Z in the headline than I do millennials. So it was actually, in preparation for this episode, it was actually a fun little walk down memory lane of all the things that millennials have killed. But I don't know that I have read any articles recently that have accused millennials. But admittedly, I also don't know that I'm as on top of my articles as you are.
So, I do think that there is something attractive about accusing the 20-year-old bracket of changing the way things are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so 10 years ago, we were right in the midst of that.
Yep.
But I do think that we are still getting blamed for certain things. So, for example, I recently saw Millennials Killed home owning,
Yes.
which would not have been something that we really would have done 10 years ago
Yeah.
because that wasn't expected of us
Yeah.
when we were in our 20s. But now that we're in our 30s, we are expected to be buying homes, and
Yes.
we are not.
We are not. You and I, not homeowners. Not homeowners. I'm actually question because I'm also curious of both A, the truth of this, and then obviously B, which I think is part of what we're talking about too, is how much of this is actually millennials killing something versus other, socioeconomic factors at play. But I am curious, using homeowners specifically as an example, how many of your millennial community friends would you say own homes?
Not a lot.
Hmm.
And I would say that the ones that do own homes either were gifted homes by their
Hmm.
family or
Like gifted the
their,
down payment, you mean? Or,
yes,
okay, like gifted the
slash,
financial ability to buy a home.
yes,
Okay. Yeah.
yes, or are owning that home with their parents.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think I have any friends who outright own their, well, except for the ones who were gifted it. I don't know anyone who saved up that money and then bought a home.
Yeah. I also don't know a ton of people. I feel like I do have a contingent of my friends here in LA and also up in the Bay Area who have homes that they've bought. I would say the ones that have bought also tend to have kids and are married.
Mhm,
So that's also a
mhm.
component of it. But now that I think about it, there are far fewer of that contingent that I know of who fully just bought those houses themselves, to your point, like didn't get help from parents or whatnot, which is not to say I don't want to penalize people who got help in buying
No.
homes.
And in
Yeah.
fact, if that's the only way you can do it, like, yes.
Yeah. But then I am thinking, out and about here in LA, especially and I'll be honest, the people that I know who buy homes, many of them are lawyers, doctors, or work in big tech, which is also saying something if that people in those professions still need financial help to buy their homes.
Right.
But when
Right.
I think about a lot of my friends or community who are in more creative industries, if they're consulting, some of them, honestly, even just from a lifestyle perspective, have opted to rent because they don't know yet where they want to settle or just feel like the cost of housing is not even just too expensive, but also just on principle exorbitantly high. But yeah, anyway, I'm taking us a little bit on a tangent here,
Yeah.
but I was just
And,
curious to dig into that one a little bit.
and honestly, another thing about it is interesting is that the people I know who do own homes, whether or not it was a gift or whether or not they have some kind of financial arrangement with their parents, those people are also more likely to be also in the market to like buy another home.
Yep. Yep. Totally. Totally.
um,
Yeah.
so I think that there is something about like that security and that nesting that
Yeah.
goes together.
Yep. Agreed.
But I do want to bring us back to
Yes.
the
Yes.
reason why millennials are being blamed for this,
Yeah.
which is there's this assumption I think that we should be buying homes,
Yeah.
whether or not it fits our lifestyle. And millennials are saying, "Hey, it's not what I want. It's
Yeah.
not
Or not
feasible,
feasible.
whatever."
Yeah.
And instead of like discussing, "Oh, it's not feasible for them or it doesn't fit their lifestyle,"
Yeah.
the response is, "Oh, they've killed it."
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's a question for you because my experience of the millennials killed was kind of a meme in the sense of come on boomer, right? Of boomers who were writing articles, either opinion pieces or reporting pieces around trends and citing millennials in the headlines. And then the meme of it, which is frankly how I became familiar with it, 5 to 10 years ago, was fellow millennials being like, "Oh, boo, like this is what boomers think that millennials killed." There was
Yeah.
the sort of initial trend of the trend pieces that were happening with usually people in older generations talking about data statistics and citing things that millennials have detrended. And then there was then the millennials killed meme, which felt like it was memed by millennials,
Yes.
honestly. So more just making the distinction, that's like how I define or came to understand millennials killed was actually more through the meme side versus the actual thought piece side too.
Yes. And I would actually take it even a step further. I think that like in my little bubble, people saw the millennials killed meme and were like, yeah, because the things that we're killing no longer make sense.
Yeah.
So I feel like 10 years ago there was this whole millennials killed big weddings.
Yeah.
And a lot of my friends were like, "Yeah, because we didn't want them."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's also
So,
so can we just discuss for a moment? It is so American to use the verb killed too,
I know.
right? Just
It's
to
so
be
violent.
it's so violent. It's so violent. While as the reality is it's like millennials have found no use for big
Right.
weddings, right?
Right. Or
Yeah,
like chose not to
yeah,
engage in weddings in that manner.
yeah. Or millennials no longer have money to buy homes and diamonds, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So that's another question I have. It's like why is there this violent accusatory framing of these trends that we no longer care to partake in?
I don't. I mean, I do think the violent piece does tend to be partly just a linguistic one and just how Americans talk about different things. But I do also think, and it's interesting putting myself now that I'm a little bit older and wiser and nearing 40 and thinking about how I talk about Gen Z, for example, or Gen A sometimes, is I do think there is a tendency to vilify is maybe not the right word, but to put blame or kind of other the younger generations in a way,
Mm,
especially if they're around concepts or trends that we might not understand. And like, I don't know, like for example, I think I've probably read articles which are maybe less about Gen Z or Gen A killed, but like I could see a headline, for example, and wouldn't be surprised by a headline today that's like Gen A or Gen Z killed person to person conversation. Right? Right.
Right.
Right? Right? And I think it's like an older generation's way of grappling with something that maybe felt precious or important to them, but is maybe no longer important to a younger generation and they don't understand why. That I don't feel like that applies across the board with all the examples, but like the one that made me laugh, for example, in the list so much was the handshakes one
Yeah.
of like millennials killed the strong handshake. That I can see just using that as an example of an older generation really appreciating, right, a strong handshake and whatnot. And then, maybe in a job interview, shaking hands with the millennial and being like, what is this floppy wrist action? Right. And I'm even thinking about it, made me laugh too, because I was thinking about how dad, when we were kids, would pay us $1 to
Yeah.
look at adults and look them in the eye and give them a strong handshake.
Though I'm
Right.
still waiting for those
I
dollars.
I know, Dad, if you're listening, where's our
Where's our
compensation?
money?
um, um, so I can see why there are certain things that, again, maybe traditions or habits that older generations sort of really appreciated that younger generations don't appreciate. But to answer your question about the violence of it all, to me that's very much a linguistic thing and very much a instead of going deep on the things that are actually the problem, i.e. millennials are poor and don't trust capitalism and all these things, or social media has taken over and our attention is being hacked and all these things. I think it just blames millennials at a face level versus diving deeper into the underlying issues. But I don't know that I'm actually answering the question around the violence of it all. I'm curious if you have a
No,
perspective on that.
I think that's right. I think that there are certain things that people, older generations, have been, I don't want to say given, but that have come easier to them,
Yeah.
that it's kind of like a comfort blanket and they wrap
Yeah.
themselves around in it, and they use it in some ways to, I think, isolate themselves
Yeah.
from what's happening to younger generations. And so when younger generations reject, whether purposefully or by non compliance,
Mm.
this safety blanket, they get accusatory
Yeah.
because it somehow threatens their way of being.
Yeah. Yeah. I do also I think there's a couple sides. As you were talking, I was thinking about the sort of meme of our childhood, which was the grandparents, which, the generation what was the generation before boomers?
I always forget.
Yeah, but I was just thinking of the meme of grandparents saying to their grandchildren, like, "Back in my day, like, I
Yeah.
walked to school in the snow," and I think there's something about the reason the reason grandparents shared those stories with their grandchildren, for example, was to highlight maybe some entitlement or ease for the younger generation. So it's interesting because I feel like some of the things that quote millennials have killed highlight entitlement, or
Hmm.
highlight maybe a sense of things were a lot harder for us when we were your age. But then there's also a version of it where it's less highlighting entitlement of millennials. I'm not doing a good job of articulating it, and more does feel like vilifying. I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to say is I think there are a couple of different use cases that I've seen it show up in.
Yeah. I do think there is something about that. Our parents' generation were like, especially in America, we're
Yeah.
extremely lucky to come out of like the post war boom.
Yeah.
And I think kind of expected life to always be that way. And
Yeah.
and in fact, for them, I think that kind of bore out.
And I think there was this picture of the American dream that was more accessible, perhaps not to everybody, but
Not to
to
everybody, but and not to everybody at the beginning, but I think that cohort also expanded as time went on. Whereas I
Yeah.
think now it's starting to constrict.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like they always saw like growth and additional democracy and like
Yeah.
additional rights, and we are seeing less less financial stability, we're seeing less diversity appreciation, we're seeing like the complete opposite.
Yeah. It's just is making me think. I have two close friends in LA. They're married to each other, both successful doctors. She is she's technically an immigrant herself, moved here with her mother when she was 5. And I think she and her husband, both of my friends, have always sort of pictured the American dream, right? Which is
Yeah,
have 2, 3 kids, be doctors, you know, which is meant to be a lucrative career, a respected one, buy a home, have a picket fence. I would say
right.
they have all of these things, including the picket fence, which she insisted on because it was like so part of her embedded mentality. But I
Yeah,
also know that they've told me in recent years that they're like, we just didn't realize money was going to be still be so tight, that this would
yeah,
be so hard, that we would need money for a down payment, that like childcare would be so expensive. So there's just this underlying reality of what I think past generations have told us was true and believed to be possible, and the actual reality of right now. So
yeah. Yeah. Which is weird because I feel like in some ways we were the ones betrayed. Like
yeah.
we were
Yeah.
told like go to college, like get a good job and you'll
Yeah.
be fine.
Yeah.
And that's the road.
We should reframe
And
the meme. It should be, instead of millennials killed
it's like
homeownership,
it's like
it should be like
yeah, it's like
boomers told us that we could own homes, but then didn't build a capitalist structure that would allow us to actually afford them. Yeah.
yeah. So it's like really you're blaming us for something that you did.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. What about the ones like there were truly, the handshakes one made me giggle. There was also the one around like paper napkins, for example, too.
I had not heard about this one. Like I guess I get it. It's like we're a little bit more environmentally conscious, and so perhaps we're not like throwing away single use items as much.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, why focus on napkins?
Yeah.
like
I
I like
totally.
honestly, I feel like millennials killed plastic straws way more than we killed paper
Yeah.
napkins.
Yeah. I mean, there is something really fascinating about the meme, the trend the millennials killed, because I do think it highlights, in a way that we might not otherwise get, it really highlights the distinction between generations and highlights trends and fads and patterns that are shifting, right? Like I would never have thought about paper napkins
Right.
unless someone from an older generation had said like, come on millennials, you killed paper napkins.
Also, paper napkins are everywhere. So I'm like,
There,
what?
but it's interesting because my 2 cents, not to rabbit hole on paper napkins, was that the sentiment was actually, yes, paper napkins are everywhere, especially in fast food restaurants and
Yes.
restaurants in general. But I think the sense was people used to buy them to have them at home, which, yeah,
Oh,
and I was like, that
okay.
is true. I just use paper towels now, which is also true. Um,
I mean, I just usually have a stash of all the restaurant paper
Yeah.
napkins.
Yeah, or I just use hand towels too, you know? Like
Right.
it's just but it was just interesting cuz for me what's kind of funny about reading through all the things that millennials killed is it just brings up some things that honestly I might not have ever thought about otherwise, that highlight differences between us and other generations.
So, putting aside, I guess, millennials, what have Generation Z and Generation
Hmm.
A killed? You said you just saw articles about
Well,
this.
I did, but it was around things like social media and like attention, like
No, and I think that's worth
Ye
talking about.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the ones, which is interesting, because I see paradoxically articles that are both about Gen Z, and no one's using the words killed, but they're sort of like Gen Z doesn't have person to person interaction, or Gen Z spends so much more time on their phones. But then I'm also seeing this sort of counter trend of, we talked about this in our last episode, is Gen Z is also researching hobbies because they're tired of being on the internet and on their phones all the time. So it's less of the killed conversation and more just going back to what I was saying about the distinction between like how this maybe highlights distinctions between generations is
Hmm.
there's this interesting thing that I think is happening with Gen Z in particular, where they're actually looking at things that millennials and boomers did decades ago and are trying to return to it in some
Yeah.
ways, which I find
Well,
really interesting.
so that's, I think, actually a really good point, because I think in some ways millennials did what boomers did to us on homeowning to Gen Z with social media. Like,
Yep.
we millennials are the ones who ushered in the social media
We just adopted it.
landscape.
Yeah.
We adopted it, but we also proliferated it. Like, Zuckerberg is a millennial.
Yep. Yep.
So we are the ones who made it the go-to.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to like think of it in that context of like maybe we're the ones who forced Gen Z out. Like maybe we're the ones to blame.
In many ways, we probably are, honestly. I mean, I do think, I mean, millennials built social media,
Yeah.
right? We did. We did.
Yeah.
I have worked at some of those companies. My friends have. We were the ones to adopt Instagram without actually thinking about it, to AIM, like AIM all the time back in the AOL Instant Messenger days. I do think we adopted it. But I think what's interesting about our generation is that that's maybe feels different than other generations is we're also the same generation that's reckoning with it too,
Yeah.
which not to get into some of the specific generational definitions, but I actually think that's part of what makes millennials really unique is that we grew up a lot of the things that we've inherently killed or a lot of the things that sort of have economically or socially been forced on us.
Hmm.
And many of us are having a reckoning with it. I mean, I'm not reckoning about the fact that we're not using paper napkins anymore, but I am
No,
having a
but
reckoning
the
around like
but
home ownership, you know?
right, but even the fact that you've like considered now the napkin, the decline of napkins is like more than I think a lot of boomers are doing with a lot of
Yeah.
things that we've supposedly killed.
Yeah.
Like I think just an awareness of how we've changed the landscape for the worse, and examining that, and perhaps putting in guardrails so that we don't continue down that way, or we don't do it again,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, is a lot more than I think a lot of boomers are doing.
Yeah. Sorry, boomers, if you're listening to
Sorry,
this.
boomers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I, again, not to make a generalization, because I don't think it's every boomer. I would like to think that mom and dad are actually very much reckoning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course it's not every boomer, but like I would say mom and dad are a little bit more introspective, I think, than
Yeah.
most people. And so
Yeah.
I think that they are looking at the world in a way that's a little bit more empathetic.
Yeah. I also think that being a millennial is, I mean, every generation has their unique characteristics, but I do think the millennial killed meme to me is so symbolic of just millennials in general, which is when we grew up in the 90s was such a different time
Oh
than
my gosh,
today,
yes.
right? Or like, and I was born in the 80s. It is such a different time. Like, we now have internet.
Yeah.
There was like the complete social geopolitical
Yeah.
landscape has completely changed. I do feel like, and not to put so much of this on the internet and capitalism, but I just feel like the World Wide Web and capitalism has transformed in a way that only our generation has witnessed and been part of. And I think that happened in our lifespan in a way that it hasn't happened for any other generation.
So we don't have to put this in the episode, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like you are talking about capitalism in a way that in the past few months that you have like never talked about capitalism before.
Oh, are you asking me if I'm a socialist now, basically?
I mean, I'm not asking you if you're a socialist, but like, what happened?
Oh,
I feel like 5 years ago, you
yeah.
were not talking about capitalism this way.
No, but I also don't think I think this is a pretty rampant conversation that is pretty omnipresent in my community right now. And I think part of it was the pandemic. I actually think a big part of it was the pandemic is it forced me, I think at least, I had suddenly an abundance of time. I think it had me thinking differently about my relationship to the companies I've worked for. I think because I had more time, I was thinking more thoughtfully about how I want to use that time.
Hmm.
I think I became a lot more sensitive to both like how companies have treated me well, but also how they've treated me poorly. And I do think, not to bring this all to big tech, but having worked primarily in big tech, I think big tech has seen a pretty incredible transformation in the past 5 years, especially where it used to be a place that was very reliable and safe for people, and frankly, for the most part, that has been my experience with it. But if you layer in all the tech layoffs, if you like layer in I think suddenly, to me, capitalism has become kind of synonymous in many ways. And I think this maybe just is specific to me and maybe the industry that I work in. I'm curious your thoughts. Has become very synonymous with like tech billionaires and AI, and kind of emblematic of a lot of what's wrong with capitalism. And I think that's like the logical piece of it. And then on the emotional side, I just have a lot of friends who, regardless of the industries they're in, who over the past couple of years have just sort of said, like, is this what it is? Is this like what life is? Is this what career is? Like, shouldn't I be living off the land maybe? Like all the promises that were made to me when I was growing up, or that older generations that were made to me, are not the truth of my reality right now. I'm saying that as like the general what I'm hearing from people. And that's not to say that everyone's miserable, depressed and whatever, but I do think there is a huge reckoning that I feel and that I'm witnessing among many of the people that I know. Like I have a hard I cannot think of one person right now that I know that is like really loving like their life holistically. Like there are parts that people, maybe they're in a happy marriage or they love their job, but I think there was this vision that was given to all of us when we were kids, and the reality as we reach our mid 30s, mid 40s as a collective millennial generation, and I think just given the context of the world right now are finding that it's not as simple and straightforward and not nearly as easy. So like yeah, you can totally feel free to cut all of that out. I think I am talking about I've been thinking about it honestly probably ever since I left Netflix, because I think part of it was the realization that so much of my identity was tied up in my career and the company that I worked for, and that felt like a bad thing and an empty promise in some ways.
Yeah. Do you think so? I actually think this does relate to our conversation because I think that in a lot of ways, people would see that or dismiss that as not me. I would not,
Yeah, yeah.
to be clear. But I think a lot of people would see that as like just the process of growing up.
Totally, which it might be. Like I've actually I even asked mom. I was having a conversation with mom recently about the fact that I'm seeing a lot of women I know in marriages feeling kind of disillusioned with the concept of marriage because of there's like not the equal load that they thought they would have. It's they're not feeling the security that they thought they would have, the happiness they thought they would have. So I asked mom that exact question related to that, was like, is this just the fact that, I'm nearing 40 and my friends are nearing 40 and they've been in their marriages for XYZ time and whatnot? or does this feel unique? And she was like, I think that feels unique. She was like, there are parts of it that I think any woman who's ever been in a marriage in like certain generations feels. But she's like, I do think there is something unique about your generations. I'm going to keep using the word like reckoning as well,
Hmm.
just in terms of our specific context, place, and time. Um, so I don't know. I don't know. And I do think our generation's relationship with companies is different than our parents' generations with companies.
Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways our parents' generation was protected from companies. I think regulations
Yep.
were stronger. I think the social network was stronger. I think companies weren't the be all and end all that they are
Yep.
now.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm actually I, I'm not anti-capitalism per se. I think in many ways capitalism has served me personally, Carlin, well,
Mhm.
though I know that it has kind of fucked other people over, to be honest. But I think for me personally, why you're hearing it more for me in the past couple years is probably stage of life, and then this combination of on a personal level, I'm witnessing I'm witnessing what used to feel like an innovative version of capitalism, i.e., big tech, become something that feels really monstrous and kind of evil sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think that it might not be as much of a tangent as I started out, because I do think
Mm,
this idea of reckoning
yeah.
with things is something that millennials are have been in a unique place to do for the
Yeah.
past 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I just like to use a specific example. I'm having a little bit of reckoning just like on the capitalist piece too, just using a specific example of where I think some of the reckoning is happening for me is where I mean the two are inherently and inextricably tied, right? Like capitalism and then socioeconomic political factors. But when I
Absolutely.
see that some of the big tech companies that I've worked for are donating to Trump's like new wing
Ballroom.
of the ballroom thing, I'm like, what the hell? Like, what gives, right? Like, is that what I've been working for by working for those companies, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and so I just think there is also this, again, the context that we live in and the stage of life that we live in right now feels pretty unique. And I'm sure other
Yeah.
generations could say that about different things, but I do think for us and capitalism in particular, there's something happening with millennials.
Yeah. And I do think that is the time, the place, the technology, the socio-political
Yeah.
atmosphere. I think it's just like all coming down. The pandemic,
Yeah.
it comes down to the pandemic,
Yeah.
it seems.
Yeah.
But like the last 10, 15 years have just been like completely uncharted, unprecedented, no pattern recognition
Yeah.
to say this is how we dealt with it the last time.
Yeah.
So I think it's no wonder that millennials are looking inward, maybe not inward, but more closely at the things that are expected of us.
Yeah. Yeah. And subsequently really posing the question to ourselves and to others of, is this what we really want? Is this what the world should really look like?
So that's a great place to end. But before we, but we're not going to end there, because I have one more question,
Yes,
which
yes.
is, so is this a trend that we should retire?
As a meme, honestly, I think it's kind of funny, to be honest. As blaming generations, I don't know. I do think there's a distinction between highlighting the differences between generations versus blaming other generations, you know?
Yeah,
I it's interesting. I think even after chatting through this with you, I'm going to be a lot more cognizant of how I talk about younger generations and frankly older generations. I feel like I've maybe vilified older generations a little bit too much in the context of this conversation as well. And maybe focusing less on what generation is doing what and who said who, and more on what are the like broader symptom or not symptoms, like issues that as a society we're probably all grappling with, and how does that impact different people differently. So yeah, like maybe the trend in and of itself of blaming different generations, yes, that should maybe die. But honestly, like I wouldn't mind seeing a couple more millennials killed memes, maybe also bred more from millennials versus other generations. It feels like one of those things where you're like, we can talk about ourselves that way, but not as fun to have other generations talking about ourselves that way. What do you think?
I honestly, this conversation has made me a lot more hopeful, which is like so counterintuitive. But I think I just had a really hard time with how the world was for a really long time, and have felt
Yeah.
up until like the last 2 years have kind of felt like I've been screaming into the void about how things have not been serving me. And I think that more people are understanding what I've been saying in a way that I really didn't feel before. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping that trend continues.
Yeah. We shall see.
We shall see.
We shall
I
see.
Who knows? Who knows? But
Yeah.
it feels like there's movement.
There is. And I mean, there's a lot happening in the world right now. I can only imagine what will unveil itself in the next year or two, let alone like the next few months.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Like tomorrow could be.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed our conversation today, we look forward to sharing more with you.
Follow us now so that when our next episode premieres, you can be sure not to miss it. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcasts.
See you next time, everyone.